Big Brother, mainstream media, government cover-ups. You want answers? Well, so does he. Live from Austin, Texas, broadcasting worldwide, it's Alex Jones.
Mike Adams in studio there at the Infowars studios. He'll be doing Infowars Nightly News. This evening we do have Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer, who came on a month ago and said that the Pentagon is upset about the move towards dictatorship of the super Congress here in America. Schaefer basically speaks for the better elements of the Pentagon. There are different power structures. He was on Freedom Watch yesterday. FBI insider, Obama administration is manufacturing this dubious terror plot. It doesn't exist. It's made up according to his FBI high-level security clearance source. Dr. Steve Pieczenik contacted me this morning and said from his Pentagon sources and others, they don't want to hit Iran, and that this is all basically a setup for the build-up for Israel to hit them. I have family that's been deployed to Kuwait. I won't talk about it, but I know what he works in. It's logistics and helicopter gunships, getting those ready for there in the Persian Gulf. And I've made some calls to other military sources when I learned this 2 nights ago. And they said, how on earth do you know this? I'm not going to talk about it. That the word is the U.S. military is preparing to back up Israel when the Iranians close the Strait of Hormuz. A gallon of gas will go from $8 to $10 conservatively. The Iranians will probably respond. Different intelligence agencies can stage terror attacks to also blame it on Iran. Russia, China could get involved. This will undoubtedly destroy the economy, but it'll be a nice political diversion. What did Gerald Celente and others say? Look for a big war. What did Lindsey Williams say a year ago on our show? He said, next is Iran. And that's from his big oil company insiders, and I know who those sources are. One of them's died now. We can talk about him. Ken Fromm, the former head of Atlantic Richfield. The other one's even more high-powered. So we have all that information right there. And Schaefer came on a month ago and said, yes, Pentagon people, high level, he's basically a mouthpiece for them at a certain level. He's joining us tomorrow. Are upset about Obama moving towards a super Congress and dictatorship. Schaefer's concerned about that. I know Dr. Steve Pieczenik, whose bio is too long, will be joining us for longer tomorrow. He's waiting in the wings right now. Co-author of Tom Clancy's books, you know that, ran Black Ops, wrote the book for the State Department on psychological warfare. He hardly ever calls me. This morning he was calling over and over again. I was on the treadmill. I jumped off and ran over there, and he said, just immediately, I said, are you calling about the Iran thing? And he said, yes. Well, I'll let him say it in his own words. But crystallized, Dr. Pieczenik, everything you're telling me is what I have from 3 military sources, what I've got from Schaefer, what I've got from Common Sense. This is incredible that a high-level FBI with the highest level security clearance says this plot doesn't exist. We're to believe Los Zetas, we know, trained at Fort Benning, Georgia, and are narcotics enforcers for big central bank systems, are supposedly working with some used car salesman. This is unbelievable, and it's right on time as Obama. People are talking about him stepping down, don't run again. Fast and furious subpoenas go out. I know you've got incredible sources, and you basically put the cards on the table. You said, look, Alex, I talked to a lot of people, a lot of people in intelligence. Appreciate the service you're doing, and I'm not getting into ego here. The point is I got from what you were saying that you've got a lot of sources like Schaefer does, and that there are good guys in the government, the Pentagon, that are upset about what's happening. So let's put the cards on the table. The intel I've got is a strike on Iran by Israel within 2 weeks, the U.S. then responding when Iran totally shuts down the oil supply.
Well, the issue, and I can't thank you enough, and I know our country, the real military and the real patriots in the intelligence community really love you and really are grateful. I came on because, once again, as a citizen, I'm not a hero. I'm a citizen, saying once again, I have that this whole issue that came out of Mexico, this entire nonsensical story, which even Mueller shamefully said was a Hollywood script, which it is, and it's a very bad script, where an informer, car salesman, talks about the potential of killing a Saudi ambassador in the United States, and somehow this Iranian is related to people in Iran is absolutely absurd. It's disinformation. DEA has had a terrible history of corruption, incompetence, as you've seen in Fast and Furious, and more importantly, this is an indictment, once again, of Eric Holder, who lied to Congress. He's now lied to the American public about what he has supposedly learned in an investigation, and more importantly, Mueller, who I'm absolutely ashamed of, the FBI director, who's a war hero from the Vietnam, has won major awards and was a combat hero, has been involved in 9/11, now is involved in this nonsensical story to create a pretext for an attack by Israel on Iran. Now, why do I say that? Because two things happened. When I heard this nonsensical intelligence report by DEA, ATF, CIA, and other elements, all of whom have been compromised and have had intelligence problems in the past, i.e., as we witnessed in the Osama bin Laden stupidity story, where no one in the world, absolutely no one in the world believes it, neither does Obama, and now Biden, the most incompetent vice president we had, with two aneurysms, a history of plagiarism, and Hillary Clinton, a woman who is pathologically a liar, incompetent, is reaffirming that Iran, who has repeatedly said we don't need to attack the United States on their home base. I know the Iranians. I was involved with Khomeini. I was involved with Rafsanjani. I don't love them, but I have respect for them. And they're very clear on their intention. Furthermore, the Iranians have proxy fights in Afghanistan with our soldiers and in Iraq. And at the same time, you can ask our generals that they have worked with the Iranians to keep down the Shiite populations, both in Iraq and Afghanistan. So both Biden is lying and is incompetent. And by the way, his in-law is Tom Donilon, who really should not be there. Obama, once again, is lying. Once again, should be considered for impeachment. We have serious war crimes here.
Well,
now, why do I say this? Because 2 weeks ago, and the reporters didn't mention this, cluster bombs were sent to Israel. Now, there is no reason for Israel to receive cluster bombs. They cannot. Cluster bombs are used to break up the tarmacs on other Air Force bases, but they're used to instigate a war. Now, cluster bombs do not necessarily being used in Syria because the Syrians have helped the Israelis with Hamas and the PLO. The Egyptians have now helped the Israelis release a soldier for 1,000 Palestinians. So Israel is not going to be using a cluster bomb, but Israel needs to divert attention away from its domestic problems where 1 million people have been unemployed, from the fact that it has an incompetent, dysfunctional civilian government in Netanyahu, and will create a war to divert that attention because the state of Palestine will be and should be recognized by the UN. And this is exactly what should happen around the world. In order to divert that attention, it has convinced Joseph Biden and Hillary Clinton, two major supporters of the Jewish community here, so that it can be mobilized in order to support an Obama election, which does not look very likely. And ironically, Obama is creating another incident at the same way when Bush Jr. had very low approval in the ratings, when the unemployment was very high. And unlike George Bush Jr., whom I thought would have been the worst president, Obama is turning out to be by far the worst incompetent president we have ever had, who really should be impeached for the lies he committed, for the travesties of justice, and now for the incompetency. You have Biden, you have Hillary Clinton, you have Mueller, you have Panetta, all civilians. But that does not explain why our military, which has had to retreat from 2 wars and has been used as cannon fodder by civilians who were totally incompetent and sent into war to die for our country. We have the most brilliant, effective leaders in our military that I've ever seen in 30 years. They have been quiet. They have followed orders, but they are sick and tired of listening to incompetent civilians sending our brave men and women into battle and dying. We have special forces that work 24/7, time all over the world to knock out extremists, and yet they get no support. Our veterans get no support back here. And now, in order to promote his Obama's election, he has gone to war again and created this nonsensical, but it is so absurd, this nonsense that Iran is about to attack the United States. Iran does not have to attack the United States. As a matter of fact, when I was involved with Khomeini, not one of our hostages was ever injured by Khomeini. It was, in fact, the terrorist group, the MEK, which is being supported by Free, a former head of the FBI, and was called the Mujahideen, that killed some of my CIA operatives, my State Department operatives, and they, in turn, are being supported by some of the prominent, both liberals and right-wingers who are receiving money. If you look at the list of the MEK, it's an issue we should talk about, they want them off the terrorist list. The real terrorists were the Mujahideen who killed all of our civilians and operatives in Tehran.
Hey, Dr. Pieczenik, this is Mike Adams here. You're not able to hear Alex because he's on his cell phone, but Alex, what's your take on all this?
Well, let me just throw this in. No, Steve's on a cell phone, so when I'm talking, he can't hear me. I was just going to throw this in, sir. I have military sources. I know you have 100 times what I have. I have common sense. I have Schaefer, Lieutenant Colonel Schaefer, coming out and being green-lighted, who still is in the Pentagon and is also part of a big think tank, to say this is bull. The New York Times has come out today and said this terror plot is made up. That shows the major elements of the power structure are saying don't go into Iran, just like Fox Fallon said no to Cheney when he tried to stage the attack. So these are my two questions for you, and tomorrow we'll get more into this. We appreciate you coming on short notice. My point was, what are your current sources, and we know you've got a lot of them, are they concurring with what I've been told, that Israel right now is test ballooning and intends to hit Iran in the next 2 weeks with bunker busters and cluster bombs to stop their Air Force retaliatory strike? They've just put into place more medium-range anti-ballistic missile systems, and the word we've got is the attack on Iran has now been green-lighted. They've put up this balloon, oh, look, Iran's going to attack us, and that it is on. So, A, what is your intel on that, A? B, what do you expect the Iranians to do? What are the different things that can happen if Iran is struck? Because the people like Ray McGovern and others I've talked to who work, the CIA as analysts, they say it runs from bad to worst. Okay, sir, those are my questions, those two questions.
The first answer is I will not quote any of my sources. In my extensive experience as a member of the Association of Former Intelligence Officers, National Military Intelligence Association, and my extensive experience in dealing with Iran, with terrorists, and incompetent civilians, you are absolutely right. We are creating a false flag situation where Israel will go forth to attack Iran. What will happen in turn is Iran will not touch the United States. It never has, and it never will. Iran is very effective at putting up pressure, number one, on Hezbollah, on Israel, on two, on Hamas, and affect Israel's northern border, its eastern border, and its southern border. In effect, what Israel is doing is approaching Armageddon, where it's continuing its self-destructive behavior, both militarily and civilian. I asked the Israeli ex-commanders of the IDF and the Mossad to come forth and to stop Netanyahu and stop the Americans who are involved in this attack, because Israel will be seriously destroyed. The state of Palestine will exist. Egypt will be there. Syria will maintain its low-intensity conflict, but Iran will exact a huge amount of problems for Israel, and Israel knows that. And Israel cannot handle that. The IDF cannot handle three borders which will be exposed. It cannot handle both Hezbollah on the north, Hamas on the south, and the Jordanian border, which is extremely, extremely vulnerable.
Steve, that's my next question.
At the same time, the Middle East will erupt in violence, because Bahrain is the area where our military and the surrogates have effectively fighting Iran. but Iran will not be involved in domestic terrorism.
How do we
don't
stop
need
this
it.
war?
Ahmadinejad is a very smart man. I always respect my enemies, and one of the things that's a problem is I do not respect our civilians. As I have said repeatedly on this show, the American public has to be awakened to the fact we have an incompetent, dangerous president. I'm not saying Democrat or Republican. We had it truthfully with Bush Jr. But this one really is out of control. You have Biden, who is totally incompetent, a history of plagiarism, a history ineffectual, with his family as being the National Security Council. You have a CIA that's totally out of control, and Panetta, who's never had experience in national security.
Dr. Pieczenik, sorry for interrupting.
How do we stop the war? How do we stop this from happening?
You stop the war
and of course, the former head of Mossad came out, as you know, 2 weeks ago and said attacking Iran would be a terrible idea, but Netanyahu wants it politically. So how do we stop this?
The Israeli people have to go into the streets. There's a million of them. And around the world, the civilians must go into the streets to demonstrate that there can be no more wars and that they have to stop the Israelis from attack and from the United States supplying Israel with weapons that are totally irrelevant to the national security of the United States. I will not quote our generals, but I feel that some of our generals have correctly stated years ago Israel is a strategic liability. Let me repeat it again. This is not just an emotional Republican or Democratic issue. There is no need for us to have Israel on our southern or eastern flank. Israel has had its own national security. Israel has funded against all its sanctions. That's why Hillary is lying like a banshee through the Ofer family oil into Iran, while at the same time condemning the nuclear program. Israel has repeatedly manipulated the AIPAC and the Jewish community in the United States and the world to say that it's being persecuted, when in fact it has not been persecuted. Israel has been out of control. Last year, there were 25 operatives trying to kill one operative in Dubai. Israel is in fact dysfunctional. The people of Israel have to mobilize into the streets, Christian, Jews, and Muslims, to stop Netanyahu. He is out of control. He was not the brightest man we ever saw under Baker. I remember he was kicked out of the office by Baker. Lieberman is totally incompetent. But I asked the Israeli former commanders, they know who they are.
Dr. Pieczenik, we've got to go to break here shortly. Alex, is there anything you want to say before we go to break?
I'm going to bow out and let you come back with Dr. Pieczenik for one more segment, and you've got guests coming on. Dr. Pieczenik will be back with us tomorrow. This issue could not be more important, ladies and gentlemen. We appreciate Dr. Pieczenik joining us. The green light for war is on. We got to turn it off. It's Infowars Radio with Steve Pieczenik, and we've got Mike Adams riding shotgun. I'm going to sign off for now. Paul Watson's coming up later. Spread the word. World War III is about to start.
All right, folks, we'll be right back after this break. Stay with us.
If you believe in this information and want to support its viral spread, go to the Infowars store at Infowars.com. We've got the new G.I. Joe Infowars T-shirts. We've got the incredible Pro Pure gravity-fed filters available at Infowars.com in the store. We've got a new DVD, Scientists Under Attack, the Don't Tread on Me flag. We've got all sorts of different bumper stickers to help spread the rebellion virally. It's all there, wristbands, citizen rule books in every order. Order online at Infowars.com today. The water filters, the canteens, it's all there. Infowars.com.
Welcome back, folks, to the Alex Jones Show. An extraordinary day. I'm filling in for Alex, who has been joining us by phone for the last 45 minutes or so. We're also joined by Dr. Steve Pieczenik, who has been giving us an analysis and a breakdown of this just truly extraordinary historical news, groundbreaking. You need to listen in to what is being said here today, because we are talking about a false flag pretext for war in the Middle East, having now been, as we're saying here, fabricated by the Obama administration. And continuing with Dr. Pieczenik, I have a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
Number one is the incompetence of this apparent false flag operation. Doesn't that strike you as a pattern from the Obama administration? If you remember the incompetence of how they tried to forge the birth certificate, it was obviously a fake. Well, this is obviously a fake terror plot. Does that strike you as something characteristic?
Let me I don't want to get into the birth certificate, but what's really the most fascinating part about Obama is the fact that he doesn't want to talk about his mother having been a CIA operative, his grandmother being a CIA operative, and his grandfather. His mother was a very impressive woman who worked at the Hawaiian Asian Pacific Center, which was a CIA front, and I honor her. And his grandmother was involved in banking for funding in East Asia. His mother went into Indonesia speaking Russian and a white woman in Arabic. So what's missing is this connection between him and the CIA. So you know that the CIA is very much a part of this and has been under 9/11 and has been out of control. And it's one of the things that Eisenhower's always said, you need a certain kind of genius to control the CIA, and unfortunately we have not had it. I'm hoping that General Petraeus can put them in line, but you have the DEA, you have the ATF, and these are not functional institutions. With all due respect to the FBI, they are brilliant domestically, but Mueller has really discredited himself twice on the 9/11 and today, and this is a war hero in Vietnam, and if I were he, I would resign out of just dignity. Eric Holder should be indicted. He's totally dysfunctional. He has lied. He has committed perjury in front of Congress. He has lied to the American public. And now what you have is dysfunctional. The most dysfunctional story of all is the fact that Osama bin Laden. There is no one in the world that believes that Osama bin Laden was killed and then was dumped into the waters. I mean, it was so absurd, it became ridiculous. Even Mueller came forth on this story about the assassination plot, saying it's like a Hollywood movie, as if he was trying to co-opt himself. And the truth of the matter is, Mueller, I'm sorry, but you failed once again, and is beyond a Hollywood movie. No producer in their right mind would have bought this, because it's not true. It has no consistency. It's dysfunctional. And once again, you have operatives who have no idea of how to create a false flag.
Well, how much of this do you think stems from the heat that Attorney General Holder must now be feeling as the subpoenas are about to be handed to him, and it looks like he's about to be handed his hat and shown the door because of his involvement in Fast and Furious? Is that a key motivation, you think, behind this?
I would say that's one of them. The fact that he is going to be handed the door. He should be actually prosecuted for lying in front of Congress, for perjury, for distortion, disinformation, for inciting a war. I mean, Eric Holder should be held accountable for a lot of malfeasance. I'm not a lawyer, but I certainly know the miscreant behavior he has had. It's not only his heat, but you have a president who has not performed, who has not been able to create jobs, who has polarized the country, and basically has very low ratings. The only way presidents historically in the United States have created and increased ratings, and this one is pitiful.
All right, Dr. Pieczenik, we are just about out of time here. I apologize for cutting you off. We're out of time for this segment. I want to thank you for joining us, and I know you're going to be back on tomorrow, I believe, for additional analysis. So thank you for joining us. Also, here on the Alex Jones Show, we are going to continue to break this down and have additional analysis. Stay with us.
Visit Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. When you're on the site, you can also tune in 24 hours a day to my daily radio broadcast. There's also a free iPhone app to listen to the syndicated radio show when and where you want.